Schlafly Collegians Summit. All across the country, collegians are gathering virtually. We've had unbelievable people here in the headquarters of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles. If you go to phyllisschlafly.com, you'll find out more about our work and what's going on. If you do me a favor and like what we're doing, share it, pass it along on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, wherever you are. And if you have comments, you can send them in now. We take some questions that are coming in. Our next guest is Alex Newman. Alex, I brought the book. I didn't want anybody to ever doubt. Look at this. I always tell you about it. Alex Newman wrote a book. It's called Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. He wrote it with the late Samuel Blumenfeld. It's a extraordinary book. It's not wonderful, it's extraordinary, and it's amazing, and it's really important to read because it was ahead of a lot of the issues that have come up with the school teachers unions. And Alex Newman is the founder and the CEO of the Liberty Sentinel, libertysentinel.org. He's won awards as a journalist. He is an amazing writer as well as a researcher, and has a burgeoning family. And after all that stuff he does, he's running for office for the State House in Florida. So, Alex, welcome. How are you today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Ed.
So we're talking to collegians, and so your sense of the education system and where we are, and then overlaid with what happened with COVID, because you were both an advocate of, wait, the teachers unions are out of control. You've talked about that for 15 years. And then you were like, wait a second, they're using COVID to close our schools, to mess with our children. For college students, they went through a lot of this. Where are we, Alex? What's the future?
Well, I think if we continue going the way that we're going with the indoctrination of our young people in K through 12 public schools, and then supercharging that indoctrination in the university system, without trying to sound overly dramatic, I think it's the end of our nation. It means the end of our freedom. It means the end of our constitutional republic. And the reality is, even though the homeschool movement is growing, and even though private schools are growing, we still have, depending on what state you're looking at, something like 2/3, in some cases more, government brainwash camps and government indoctrination centers. So I think that is probably the single greatest risk to the future survival of our nation. And again, I don't mean to sound overly dramatic. I'm just trying to be realistic here. All the other issues that we're fighting on, they're important, and we need to keep fighting these battles. But ultimately, every dictator of the last 100 years has understood and has said publicly that their key to obtaining power and to controlling the population is educating the youth and molding their minds. So we're now in a situation, and I think it's very hard for people who don't have the context, American history. What did education used to look like? What level of education did our forefathers have? It's very hard to see that decline because it's happened slowly over a period of generations. It is accelerating now, but if we look at where we're at, compared with where we were even 100 years ago, what you find very quickly is that Americans are now far more dumbed down than we've ever been, far more indoctrinated, far less Christian, far more apt to go with socialism. I'm a millennial, so I'm one generation above the current college students. And the polling data shows, 70% of us millennials describe themselves as socialists. A minority now says that they're Christian. So if we continue on this trajectory, again, I think it's all over for our country. This is the one battle where everything else is going to be won or lost.
We're talking with Alex Newman again. LibertySentinel.org is one place you can go to see his writings. Alex, we've been using as the framework for this Collegians Summit the speech, and you'll know Patrick Henry, of course, and his speech, "Give me liberty or give me death," from March of 1775. But the line we're referring to is, "The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It's to the vigilant, the active, the brave." And how would you inspire, what you just painted? I believe you. Alex Newman, for my collegians that are listening and have been watching this, he's somebody I rely on for his judgment. So I believe you. But if you're a college student, you're like, inflation's out of control. My parents are struggling with their jobs. I'm watching things that are wars in Ukraine where we're dumping money and they're talking about nuclear war. It doesn't feel very optimistic. How do you inspire the young people, to the bravery, to the vigilance, to the kind of activism that we need to stem what's going on?
Well, there's a few things, and I recognize, like you said, Ed, things look very grim right now. We've got the inflation out of control. We've got the wars. We've got the food crisis coming. The Democrats with their kangaroo clown show January 6th committee. Ultimately, I think they're aiming to prosecute Donald Trump. And a lot of his top people. So right now, if you look at things at a surface level, it looks like we are outmanned, outgunned, and in a very bad position. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. Our nation is in a very precarious place right now. But there is a lot to be hopeful for. I mean, you look around and you see, I think the great majority of the American people are common sense. They do want to preserve our system of government. They do want some semblance of sanity to return. And then, we always have to remember divine providence. When our founding fathers went up against the most powerful military, the most powerful empire on the face of the planet, they knew that was going to be a really, really tough battle. They knew that they were putting their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor on the line to be able to fight this. But they didn't rely on themselves. They didn't rely on their marksmanship. They didn't rely on their rifles. Those were all important tools. But ultimately, as they themselves said, they were putting their reliance, their trust in divine providence. In other words, the hand of God working through the ages. And when you read the scriptures, it's so clear that God has got the backs of his people. I was just reading Nehemiah yesterday. A friend of mine, a legislator in Florida, called and said, go to Nehemiah 4. And, in there he says, our God will fight for us. And that's been all through history. You look at the story of Gideon, one guy, and God whittled the army down to 300 men, and they took on this massive Midianite army. So yeah, things look grim right now, but there are many reasons to be optimistic. There are many reasons to be hopeful. And in any case, the consequences of losing this battle are too horrific to contemplate, and so therefore that cannot be an option, right? We cannot lose that. It's got to be totally taken off the table.
Alex Newman's our guest. I got, the Collegians are looking and listening, and I just got a text from someone who's listening, and they said, well, Alex Newman's a journalist, and I have to say there's a lot of hats you wear as an author, as a journalist, but that is one of the things you've won awards as a journalist. And this Collegian's question was, what's the future for conservatives in journalism? When you look at big media and big tech, that's me adding that. How do you tell young believers and conservatives to go into media right now?
Well, I'll tell you this: truth is an incredibly powerful weapon. I mean, it is the most powerful weapon. The other side needs billions of dollars to promote their lies and their propaganda. They've got all this legacy media. They've got the big papers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, ABC, and yet still their lies are not passing the smell test for average Americans. You look at the Rasmussen polling, 51% of American people think the 2020 election was rigged, and yet every major media outlet has been bombarding us with propaganda about how only terrorists and kooks and conspiracy theorists believe that, and yet most Americans believe that. So we know that the media has lost its effectiveness, and the one growth area that we've seen in the media industry is in conservative media. The Epoch Times, which I write for regularly, now it's the fourth largest newspaper in America. It's growing very, very rapidly. I think they have 1.7 million subscribers, something along those lines. That's huge. It's absolutely huge, and it's something that would have been unthinkable 10 or 20 years ago. When I was in journalism school a decade ago, our professor still hadn't realized what was going on. They still said to the kids, hey, you guys are going to be the gatekeepers. You're going to be in charge of deciding what people read and hear. Oh, baloney, right? With the advent of the internet, they're not going to be able to put that toothpaste back in the tube. It's out, and conservative media is growing. I think it's a growth industry. People are hungry for the truth, and now is a very good time to be a journalist interested in the truth rather than the corporate progressive propaganda.
Alex Newman is our guest again. LibertySentinel.org. I want to do one last line of discussion with you as we're talking to our collegians. You described yourself. You said you were a graduate of journalism school, successful wife, a bunch of kids. Life is pretty good, and you're running for office. I actually think it's important. It was Matt Gaetz earlier. Congressman Gaetz said to these collegians, hey, don't let people tell you you have to wait till your turn. And that he said youth is an advantage. But tell us, why are you running for office? Tell us a little bit about that race and why it's important.
Well, I think right now we need to be involved in the political realm. It's not an optional thing. If we continue ceding the ground of politics to big government people, to people who don't value our Constitution, people who don't appreciate the incredible benefits of our civilization, of our constitutional Republican form of government, we're going to lose those things. And that has been happening for way too long. So I tell people it is critical to get involved in politics. If you're willing to run, great. That's awesome. I can tell you it's hard work, but it's rewarding. But if you're not willing to run, that doesn't excuse you from being involved. You can go knock doors. You can go do phone banking. You can donate if you're a person of means. There are lots of ways to get involved in electing good candidate. And ultimately, that's what we have to do, not just at the federal level. You know, right now, I look at Congress as the source of so many of our problems in this
Right.
country. But state legislative races are winnable, and state legislatures have a lot of power. In fact, the way our country was formed, it was the states coming together and creating a federal government with a few innumerable powers. Now, today, they teach that to the young people. They act like, you know, our states are just basically administrative units of our central regime. But our Constitution is still in force. Our Constitution is still the supreme law of the land. And so state governments can and are doing a lot to rein in what the federal government is doing. My state of Florida has led the way under our Governor Ron DeSantis, and I expect that we'll continue to do that. And I encourage young people out there, get involved, run for office, and make positive changes. We can do a lot at the local and the state level. You know, where I live in Florida, life went on pretty much as normal during the COVID thing. But if you were in, you know, some local government in California, you lived as a serf in ways rights were stripped from you that we never even thought of as rights. Your right to go to work, your right to go to church. I mean, basic things. So it's a huge battlefield, and it's one where conservatives and Christians and people who love our country must be represented.
Well, Alex Newman, I appreciate very much, and I hope I know how important it is to have candidates running for office that are making important arguments. I often tell people that are thinking about being candidates, the race for office is one whole sort of ministry where you're actually giving people an option and informing their lives. Then being in office is another whole challenge. So thank you for doing that, Alex. Alex Newman will make sure to share your information. We appreciate you very much, and we wish you all the best, and we'll be in touch again soon.
Thank you so much, Ed. Appreciate it.
All right, Alex Newman, everybody, and we'll take a break. And when we come back, we've got a lot more. We're coming up in a few moments. We'll talk with Armstrong Williams, who is a media mogul, among other things, and a lot more. It's the 29th Phyllis Schlafly Collegians Summit, and a lot happening. And please continue to share and like all of our stuff on social media. I'll be back in a moment. It's Ed Martin. Thank you for watching.